Is it the ROG Ally, or is ROG all lies? Listen, let me get this out of the way. I am a Steam Deck creator, and the Steam Deck is the bar by which I measure other handhelds, right? That doesn't mean I'm a fanboy, and it doesn't mean I'm not open to other handhelds. I may even be biased to some degree, but I pride myself in being able to recognize my biases and even tell you about them. That's not to mention that leading up to the launch of the ROG Ally, I told you guys honestly, I was excited about a handheld from another major player like ASUS. I was excited about today's ROG Ally event, which took place at 10 a.m. my time, but from the beginning, there were lies and mistruths that I was really disappointed by. And you may have predicted some of them, but now we really get to see the full extent of those lies. Mind you, I still place my pre-order, and I'm not going to cancel it. If nothing else, I owe you guys an honest review of the device so long as you're still interested. But also, I'm still happy that there's competition. This is still a significant upgrade from the 6800U, and I genuinely want to see how Microsoft will improve Windows so that it's more suited to a gaming first experience. I just wish that ASUS had been more realistic with the marketing leading up to this event and during this event. Let's start with the first thing that turned me off during the presentation. All right, what is this graph? Like really? What is this graph? The y-axis goes from 2D game to 3D games, cinematic graphics, 720p, 1080p, and then 4K. What is this? Who approved this? Despite the fact that they never actually named the Steam Deck, the implication, of course, is that the Ally is a generational leap over the Steam Deck. And I should clarify that when I say generational here, you could have two different definitions of generations, right? In the PC world, hardware generations are separated by 1 year, but console generations are denoted by 5 years or more. So I feel like ASUS is implying a 5-year improvement that they were able to achieve because the Steam Deck is a 720p machine and the ROG Ally is supposedly a 1080p machine, but that's a gross mischaracterization. Look at this performance comparison from The Verge, and shout out to Sean Hollister who has an amazing review on this device. The difference between the Steam Deck and the Ally at the performance preset is not enough to imply a 5+ year improvement. In fact, let's go to another slide from the Ally presentation, this one. Before ROG Ally, 25 to 30 FPS, but with the ROG Ally Z1 Extreme, you get 50 to 60. Let's compare that to Linus's results with Returnal. Returnal gets 25 FPS on the Steam Deck and 29 FPS on the Ally when both are at 15 watts. Even if you pump the Ally up to turbo or 25 watts, you get 38 FPS. Nowhere near the 50 to 6 number, which where does that even come from? They just showed us numbers. And while we're talking about performance, another lie they told us, a lie by omission, was when they talked about handheld performance prior to release and failed to tell us that even a full year after the Steam Deck's release, this brand new chip does not beat the Steam Deck at 10 watts and below. That has an extremely tangible effect on battery life. I'm going to show you that later, but the TLDR is that this machine actually has to work harder for less demanding games than the Steam Deck. Games like Dead Cells and Cuphead are going to use up more total energy to play at the same frame rate when played on the Ally versus on the Steam Deck. And it's not only relevant to less demanding games, well-optimized games like Forza Horizon 5 and Doom Eternal are quite playable on the Steam Deck at 10 watts, but dip to below 30 on the Ally at the same wattage. These lies about performance can seemingly be attributed to ASUS and AMD marketing this as a custom chip, which that itself is a lie. It was leaked a few weeks ago that this is basically the 7840U with some minor changes. AMD later came and said that they basically adjusted voltage curves and things like that so that it performs better than the 7840U at lower wattages. And I believe that particular claim, but I would argue that the work done is simply not enough if the Ally still loses to the Steam Deck at 10 watts and below. If ASUS didn't make this such a big part of their marketing, I wouldn't care, but they did. They emphasized real handheld play, and they emphasized battery life that competes with the Steam Deck. That brings us to the next lie, battery life. The ROG Ally has a 40 watt-hour battery, which is the same exact capacity as the Steam Deck. That means that at the same power profile, aka 15 watts, the battery life should be the exact same. And if the Ally is more performant than the Steam Deck at 15 watts, then you should get some extra juice out of it too. And all of that is true in theory, and that's exactly the angle that ASUS marketing went with, but in practice, it just doesn't hold up. Here are some examples from Sean Hollister's review again. Quote, with the ROG Ally, 4 hours looks like the best you can bargain for. With the Steam Deck, the best case scenario is closer to 7. The PC port of PlayStation 2 title Prince of Persia: Sands of Time consumed around 8.5 watts on the Deck and 12.5 watts on the Ally, to give you another point of comparison, end quote. Thankfully, the battery life difference is much less drastic when testing demanding games on both machines, but there is still a difference, and the Steam Deck still lasts longer, at least according to the Linus Tech Tips review. All right, let me move on to something else that turned me off in this presentation, and that's the level of Microsoft and Windows propaganda. I'm going to be honest, unlike some of my viewers, I'm not a Linux superfan or loyalist. I generally like Windows just fine. I've grown up with Windows, and I'd like to see Microsoft improve their operating system so that it's much better for people that are going to use it on gaming first machines, like gaming handhelds and home theater PCs. I see the Steam Deck as proof that it is possible to make a gaming first experience much better, and I'd like to see Microsoft take that as motivation. The problem is, they haven't. They didn't do anything to make Windows better, and the ROG Ally software doesn't really seem to improve the situation any more than solutions that already exist. They tout their launcher, but the world didn't need another launcher aggregator on Windows. There's Launchbox and Playknight, there's the Ion Neo solution, and even Heroic Launcher works on Windows. There was also a lot of lip service to the ROG Ally Command Center, but if you considered that the Steam Deck software was unfinished at launch, well, it sounds like that's nothing compared to the current state of the Command Center. Let's look back at the Verge's review for one example. Sean says, quote, the resolution switcher between 720p and 1080p only affects the Windows desktop, not games, and will also affect additional monitors you plug in, end quote. This is similar to Ion Neo's Command Center and basically means that you still have to fiddle with the game afterwards. That's contrary to the Steam Deck, which uses GameScope to force the game to change resolution. Likewise, I cringed a little bit during the presentation when they said that any game works on this because this uses Windows. And maybe I'm splitting hairs here, but I don't think this properly conveys the different compatibility issues that do pop up for older games on newer versions of Windows. Here's Sean trying to play Sands of Time. He says, quote, the first time I launched Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time on the ROG Ally, it crashed. Then it crashed again when I tried to access the graphical settings, and again when it tried to load part of the first level of the game, sometimes throwing strange error messages. I had to download a special widescreen fixer patch to get it to run at all. The first time I launched it on the Deck, it just worked. The 2003 Windows game ran in Linux, tricky to render fog and all. It automatically loaded a community controller profile that bound my buttons exactly as I remembered on the PlayStation 2. The right joystick swung the camera a little too quickly, but I fixed that in 10 seconds by summoning the controller configurator and turning down the joystick sensitivity, end quote. Windows has compatibility problems too, and to ignore them altogether feels like propaganda. I know Microsoft is working closely with ASUS here, but I'm starting to come around to the theory that this is being partially bankrolled by Microsoft. If that's true, that feels like another lie by omission. The second half of the presentation, which included a panel with head of Xbox hardware Roanne Sones, just felt like a Microsoft presentation. The more they talked about it, the more they seemed like they were positioning this specifically as a Microsoft or even Xbox handheld. And I guess that's fine, but I'm worried about what this means for Linux drivers for this device. I suspect that it's going to be a long time before we see Linux drivers, and even then limited support for advanced features. It's not all negative though. There are some things that ASUS really delivered on that I'm still excited about. According to many reviewers, it is in fact light, comfortable to hold, and very quiet. And it is still a decent boost in performance. I just wish they didn't exaggerate how big that boost was. But there was a poignant comment that Kyle from Cryobyte shared with me. This was posted by a user named DJ over on the Cryobyte server. I'll link to that below. I'll tell you what they said, but note the asterisks because we're going to get to those too. They said, quote, honestly, really disappointing. Better screen, better performance, better fan noise, some extra anti-cheat games, and a bit lighter. 3 of which have asterisks, and all of which come at the cost of worse software, much worse support, worse hardware ergonomics, e.g. controls, more expensive, little to no modability, significantly worse repairability, and worse battery life. So it only beats the Steam Deck in a very select niche, and that's about it. I think it will sell well, especially if they can stock it in places like Best Buy, but way more disappointing than it was promising. Then regarding those asterisks, for better screen, for example, He says 1080p at that screen size makes little to no difference at the cost of performance and battery life, and 720p is just blurry on a non-native resolution. Higher refresh rate is nice, but comes at the cost of extra battery life when turned on, and no apparent or easy option to set it to 40 Hz. Based on my experience with the Aya Neo 2, I would agree about the screen size, the 1080p, and how it gets blurry at 720p. He also says better performance, but only against the stock Steam Deck, and only above 10 watts, and more power draw, which means again, worse battery. Cryo utilities, undervolting, overclocking are either unsupported or unknown possibilities for the Ally, which makes the deck perform significantly better while drawing the same or less power, meaning it likely beats it up to 15 watts and possibly beyond. And he says, yes, the Steam Deck can run at greater than 15 watts. And that's, you know, if you're willing to mod your Steam Deck and go that far. DJ also mentioned worse repairability and potentially worse support. And I got to call out that there was a video that Gamers Nexus uploaded this morning on the same day. It was a scathing video, and it details very questionable actions on the part of ASUS, and this is with regard to a motherboard that they released. So I'll link to that in the description too, but the point is that they released a bad product with this motherboard, and potentially their updates will break it, and they're not supporting it. So yeah, I have concerns as far as that goes, but listen, like I said, I pre-ordered it. It's going to be on its way, and it's going to be here June 13th. I will do an in-depth review, so it'll probably be a few weeks after that, but stay tuned. I'll keep you posted on my thoughts on it. And what I also want to do once I get my hands on it, I kind of want to try wiping all of the ASUS, the Armor Crate, all of the Command Center stuff, and try things like handheld companion or handheld control panel on this and see if it's a better experience than what you get out of the box with the ROG software. So stay tuned. I'll keep you posted. In the meantime, check out one of my other videos, and otherwise, Deck Gang out. Goodbye.